The sun had just started to set, casting an orange hue across the sky as the ambulance screeched to a halt outside the bustling emergency room. Inside, 63-year-old Clara Johnson lay on the stretcher, her face contorted in pain, her breathing shallow and rapid. The thick lump on the back of her neck, a swelling that had appeared just days ago, had suddenly grown worse. It was painful to touch, and Clara couldn't recall any injury that might have caused it. Panic started to rise in her chest as the paramedics wheeled her through the ER doors. Dr. Matthew Reynolds, a seasoned emergency physician, was already at the front desk, reviewing a stack of patient files when the team arrived with Clara. He quickly assessed the situation, his trained eyes scanning the monitor showing Clara's vitals. Her blood pressure was high, her pulse racing. "Get her in fast, let's move," Dr. Reynolds instructed, his voice firm but calm. "We need to act now before it gets worse." Nurses scrambled, assisting with Clara's transfer from the stretcher to a bed. Clara winced in pain, her neck too sensitive to turn. She clutched the sides of the bed, her knuckles white. Fear had taken hold of her, but she couldn't express it. The nurses worked quickly, their hands gentle but efficient. Clara's mind raced. The lump had started off small, barely noticeable. But over the past 2 days, it had swollen to the size of an egg, and the pain seemed to worsen by the hour. What could this be, she thought, her thoughts clouded with worry? Her hand went instinctively to the back of her neck, but the pain flared up again and she winced, pulling her hand away. Dr. Reynolds pulled on his gloves as he approached her, his expression a mix of concern and professionalism. He needed to know what they were dealing with, fast. "Clara, I know you're scared, but we're going to take care of you," Dr. Reynolds reassured, his voice calm. "We'll get to the bottom of this. Just hang in there for me, okay?" Clara nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "It hurts. Please make it stop." The nurse began in 4-drip, injecting fluids into Clara's arm, while Dr. Reynolds prepared to examine the swollen mass. The ER was in full swing now, with patients being checked in, alarms going off in the background, and the general hustle of the emergency room continuing around them. But Clara's case had already attracted the attention of several medical professionals, each wondering what the unusual swelling could be. Dr. Reynolds applied gentle pressure to the lump on Clara's neck, feeling it for any abnormalities. It was firm but not hard. The pain Clara experienced was immediate, causing her to gasp and stiffen. He looked up at the nurse. "Get her an ultrasound immediately. Let's see what's going on inside." Within minutes, the ultrasound technician arrived, wheeling in the machine. The sterile sound of the gel being applied to Clara's neck was followed by a deep hum as the technician prepared to scan the lump. Clara's eyes were squeezed shut as the cold gel touched her neck. Her mind wandered, and the thought of a serious condition began to creep into her thoughts. Was this something simple, or was it far worse than she imagined? The technician moved the probe across the swollen area, her fingers moving expertly, all while Clara tried to stay still despite the growing discomfort. "Everything's going to be fine, Clara," Dr. Reynolds said, though his tone lacked the certainty Clara was desperately hoping for. Seconds felt like minutes. The sound of the ultrasound machine filled the room, the click and hum echoing in Clara's mind. It was a moment of unbearable suspense. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. As the technician reviewed the scan, Dr. Reynolds looked at the nurse, signaling that something was not adding up. His brow furrowed slightly. "We'll wait for the full report, but I'm not liking what I see so far," he murmured under his breath. The tension in the room was palpable. Clara's heart raced and a pit formed in her stomach. She could only lie there, helpless, waiting for answers that might change everything. Clara Johnson had always prided herself on living a simple, quiet life. A retired schoolteacher, she spent her days gardening in the backyard of her cozy suburban home in Lancaster, watching the seasons change from the comfort of her porch swing. At 63, she still managed to keep up with the demands of her home and kept herself busy with small projects, knitting scarves for the local shelter and volunteering at the senior center. She had never been one for doctors, always a believer in the body's natural resilience. For the past few years, she had experienced the usual aches and pains of aging, sore knees, a stiff back, but nothing that could slow her down for long. She was independent, proud, and healthy, or so she thought. It wasn't until last week, when Clara noticed the first sign of something wrong, that she allowed herself to entertain the idea of something more serious. The lump at the back of her neck had appeared seemingly overnight. At first, it was small, just a tender spot that she brushed off as nothing more than a muscle knot. But it didn't go away. Over the next few days, it grew slowly but steadily. At first, Clara thought it might be an infection or a simple cyst, something that could be drained or removed. She decided to wait it out, hoping it would resolve on its own, but the pain had only increased. She could no longer sleep comfortably at night. Turning her head became an effort, and when she reached up to touch it, she was met with a sharp, throbbing pain that left her breathless. The day before her hospital visit, the swelling had grown larger, more pronounced. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Clara's children, all grown and living on their own, had urged her to go to the doctor, but Clara had hesitated. She had lived a full life after all, and she wasn't eager to face whatever health issues might arise with age. Yet something inside her told her it was time. Her daughter, Emily, had arrived at her home that morning, and she had insisted they go to the hospital. Clara finally gave in, feeling the weight of her own fear slowly settling in. She wasn't just worried about the lump. She was scared of what might come next. Her mind raced with thoughts of her mother, who had passed away years ago from cancer, and how Clara had watched her suffer. The thought that this lump might be a similar sign of something insidious was almost too much to bear. The drive to the hospital had been filled with silence, her daughter asking gentle questions, trying to ease her nerves. Clara hadn't responded much, her thoughts consumed by worry. The lump seemed to grow heavier in her mind with every passing moment. As she sat in the ER now, the sterile smell of the hospital and the cold, unfeeling walls seemed to reflect the same emotion she felt inside, unsettling, ominous, and unfamiliar. Clara had always been the strong one. But now, lying in a hospital bed, waiting for the results of tests that might change everything, she felt vulnerable in a way she never had before. Emily sat by her side, her hand resting gently on Clara's. Her daughter was a picture of concern, her face etched with lines of worry. Emily had always been the practical one, the one who kept everything together. It was hard for Clara to admit that, in this moment, she needed her daughter to keep it together for both of them. "I'll be right here, Mom," Emily whispered, giving Clara's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." Clara forced a weak smile, but inside, her heart was heavy with fear and uncertainty. What was this lump? And more importantly, what did it mean for her future? The seconds stretched on as they waited for the results, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Clara wanted to reach for her daughter's hand again, but she couldn't bear to look her in the eye, not yet. The questions in her mind were too overwhelming. The room was quiet, too quiet for Clara's comfort. The rhythmic beeping of the machines around her was the only sound, and it seemed to intensify her anxiety. The ultrasound technician had already left with the images of her neck, and now they were waiting for the doctor to arrive with the results. Emily sat in the corner, her phone in hand, checking updates from Clara's other children. Her hands trembled, but she tried to hide it behind the screen. Clara lay in bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The pain was still there, gnawing at the back of her neck. Every so often, her fingers would twitch in involuntary response to the discomfort. She felt trapped in her own body, unable to move freely, unable to escape the overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Finally, the door opened and Dr. Reynolds stepped inside, his expression a mixture of focus and professionalism. Clara's heart skipped a beat as he approached her bed, followed by a nurse who carried a clipboard and a folder of paperwork. He looked at the screen where Clara's medical history was displayed, and then at her. His eyes softened slightly as he began to speak. "Clara," he began, his voice steady yet carrying a weight that made her feel like the ground was shifting beneath her, "we've gone over your scans and some of your initial test results." He paused, glancing at the nurse before returning his attention to Clara. Clara didn't want to hear what he had to say. She already knew that the lump was something serious, something that wouldn't go away with a few antibiotics or painkillers. Still, she forced herself to listen, her stomach churning with fear. "We're seeing some abnormalities," Dr. Reynolds continued. "The lump on your neck is not a cyst or an infection as we initially suspected. The ultrasound shows irregular growth patterns, which indicate that the mass might be malignant." The words hit Clara like a blow to the chest. Malignant? The word was sharp, harsh, like a dagger twisting inside her. Her mind began to race, and for a moment she couldn't hear anything else. All she could think about was her mother, how she had fought so hard against her own cancer diagnosis, and how that fight had eventually been lost. Emily looked up at Dr. Reynolds, her face pale. "What does that mean? How serious are we talking?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her best attempt to stay calm. Dr. Reynolds took a breath. He wasn't sure how to deliver the news, but he couldn't keep it from them any longer. "At this stage, it's hard to say for certain without further testing. What we can confirm is that the mass is abnormal. It could be something that's contained and treatable, but it's also possible that it's more aggressive. We'll need to run additional tests, including a biopsy, to know what we're dealing with. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat was dry and the words just wouldn't come. She felt the tears well up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show weakness. Not now. Not in front of Emily. Emily stood up, walking to Clara's side, her hand gently brushing her mother's shoulder. We'll get through this, Mom. Whatever it is, we'll fight it together, she reassured, though the shakiness in her voice betrayed her own fear. Dr. Reynolds offered a slight smile, though his eyes were filled with concern. We'll do everything we can, he said softly. For now, we'll set up the biopsy and we'll keep monitoring the situation closely. In the meantime, I suggest you rest, Clara. The stress isn't helping your condition, and we'll need you at your best for whatever comes next. The doctor made a few notes on his clipboard before turning to leave. As the door clicked shut behind him, Clara felt the weight of the diagnosis settle deeper within her. The word malignant echoed in her mind, refusing to fade. The uncertainty of it all gnawed at her. Would she have the strength to face whatever was coming? Emily sat down on the edge of Clara's bed, squeezing her hand. They both sat in silence for a long while, the gravity of the situation sinking in. What was this lump? What kind of fight was she about to face? Clara couldn't bring herself to ask those questions out loud. She already knew the answer. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she might not be able to fight this one. The next few hours were a blur for Clara. The emotions hit her all at once: anger, fear, disbelief. Every time she tried to focus on anything other than the diagnosis, her mind would circle back to that one word: malignant. The doctors were not certain yet, but they had suggested a biopsy, something Clara wasn't sure she was ready for. The fear of what it could reveal paralyzed her. Emily had gone home to get some rest, promising to return as soon as the biopsy results came in. Clara was left alone in the sterile, white room, the hum of the machines and the occasional chatter of nurses echoing faintly down the hall. She stared out the window, her gaze unfocused as the lights from the streetlights outside flickered in the growing dusk. It was only when she tried to turn her head that she felt the familiar tightness in her neck. The lump, now even larger and more pronounced than before, felt like a foreign object in her body, something that didn't belong. Clara had spent her entire life caring for others, teaching, helping, guiding, and now she was the one who needed help. The irony was suffocating. The door creaked open and Clara's heart skipped a beat. Dr. Reynolds walked in, his face more serious than before. Behind him was another doctor, someone Clara hadn't seen before. He had a serious air about him, with a clipboard in hand, his gaze focused intently on Clara as he entered the room. "Clara, this is Dr. Samuel Harris, our oncologist," Dr. Reynolds began, offering a soft smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "He'll be taking over your case from here. I wanted you to meet him before we proceed with anything else." Clara blinked, surprised. Oncologist. That was the first time she'd heard that word in reference to her. The realization hit like a sledgehammer. Dr. Harris extended a hand, his touch warm but firm. "Nice to meet you, Clara. I'm here to make sure we explore all the possible options moving forward. I know this is a lot to process, but I want to assure you we have a plan." "Plan?" Clara's voice cracked as she spoke. "What plan? You think there's a chance this isn't cancer?" The word felt alien coming from her own mouth. Dr. Harris didn't look away. He nodded slowly. "It's too early to say for sure. Your symptoms are certainly concerning, and based on the scans we have so far, we need to proceed cautiously. The biopsy will give us a clearer picture of what we're dealing with." Clara closed her eyes, feeling overwhelmed. The weight of it all seemed to press down on her chest. She could barely breathe under the intensity of it. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as bad as they feared. But now, with an oncologist in the room, reality was setting in. "You mentioned that there's a chance it's something else?" Emily's voice, though small, broke through Clara's swirling thoughts. She hadn't even realized her daughter had returned. She looked up, meeting her mother's eyes with a question that didn't need to be asked aloud. Dr. Harris took a seat by Clara's bedside, his expression thoughtful. "There's always a chance. The lump could still be something benign, although the signs we've seen so far don't align with that. But until we get the biopsy results, we can't rule anything out." Clara's mind raced. Could it really be something else? Could this just be an infection, a result of some other condition she hadn't considered? The thought was fleeting, but Clara clung to it for a moment. Hope was all she had left. She needed that glimmer of possibility to keep herself grounded. "We'll keep you as comfortable as we can in the meantime," Dr. Reynolds said, his tone still calm but with an underlying urgency. We'll also run more tests over the next few days to ensure we have all the data we need. He stood up to leave but turned to Clara one last time. You're in good hands. We'll take it one step at a time. As the door clicked shut behind them, Clara was left alone once again with her thoughts. The lump on her neck pulsed, an ever-present reminder of the uncertainty she now faced. Emily sat quietly beside her, but the silence in the room spoke volumes. There was nothing more to say at the moment. They had a biopsy scheduled. They would wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Clara reached out and grasped Emily's hand, squeezing it tightly as if holding on for dear life. How much longer could she hold on to hope? The following day, Clara found herself sitting up straighter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Dr. Samuel Harris entered the room once again, clipboard in hand. His presence was calming, even if the weight of his words had already settled heavy on her shoulders. He had just returned from reviewing the results of the tests and scans that had been completed overnight. Clara, Emily, Dr. Harris greeted them warmly, though Clara could sense the tension in his voice. He was trying his best to maintain a professional calm, but even he couldn't hide the seriousness of the situation. I'm here to go over the results with you and discuss the next steps. Emily, sitting beside Clara, nodded, her fingers still holding on to her mother's hand, her grip tight with worry. She was braced for the worst. Clara, on the other hand, could only stare at the doctor, waiting for him to speak. The silence in the room felt like it was stretching the seconds into minutes, and Clara's anxiety grew with each passing moment. Dr. Harris took a seat at the foot of Clara's bed, glancing at Emily before turning back to Clara. His expression softened. The biopsy results have come back, he began, pausing to let the words hang in the air. Unfortunately, we did find malignant cells. Clara's heart dropped. Malignant. The word echoed in her mind, a sharp reminder of the fear that had been gnawing at her since the doctors had first mentioned the possibility of cancer. Her hands trembled, but she squeezed her fingers together, trying to keep herself composed. She couldn't break down. Not yet. Dr. Harris continued, his tone gentle but firm. It's a type of carcinoma, specifically squamous cell carcinoma, which means it's a form of skin cancer that has spread to the lymph nodes in the neck. This explains the swelling and the pain you've been experiencing. Clara blinked, her mind struggling to process the words. Skin cancer? She had never imagined this would be the diagnosis. She thought of her mother again, her struggle with a different form of cancer, and the years she had spent trying to fight it. Clara couldn't help but feel a pang of fear rise inside her chest. Was this it? Would she be facing the same fate? I know this is a lot to absorb, Dr. Harris added, his voice unwavering. But I want you to know that this is not an immediate death sentence. We still have options and there are treatments available. Emily looked at Clara, her face pale. She didn't speak, but her worried expression was enough to communicate the gravity of the situation. Clara turned her gaze back to Dr. Harris, her voice shaky as she spoke. What kind of treatments? What does that mean for me? Dr. Harris met her gaze. We'll begin by staging the cancer. That means we'll need to determine how far it has spread. After that, we can discuss the treatment options: chemotherapy, radiation therapy, or possibly surgery to remove the tumor. The good news is that squamous cell carcinoma in the neck area is treatable, especially when caught early, and we believe we can intervene before it spreads further. A small glimmer of hope flickered in Clara's chest. She was terrified, yes, but perhaps there was a chance. Perhaps this wasn't as hopeless as she had initially feared. Her mind raced with questions, but she didn't know where to start. What would she choose? What did she want? I know it's hard to think about right now, Dr. Harris said, sensing her turmoil. But we'll be with you every step of the way. You'll have a team of specialists to guide you through this, and we'll take things one step at a time. Emily finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. We'll fight this, Mom. You're not alone. We'll do this together. Clara squeezed Emily's hand tighter, feeling a surge of warmth flood her chest. Her daughter's words were exactly what she needed to hear. But even as the words of reassurance filled the room, Clara's mind was still clouded with questions. The uncertainty was overwhelming. Dr. Harris stood up, preparing to leave. I know you'll need time to process all of this. We'll give you space, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll arrange for a follow-up appointment to discuss the staging process and what comes next. As he left, Clara's thoughts swirled in a haze of disbelief. Cancer. The word had finally sunk in and she didn't know what to do with it. But one thing was certain, she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She would fight this with everything she had. The next few days in the hospital passed in a blur of tests, consultations, and more waiting. Clara could feel the tension in the air, the constant movement around her, but it was all so surreal. Despite the reassurances from Dr. Harris and the nurses, the overwhelming fear of the unknown seemed to consume her at times. Clara had been scheduled for a full-body scan to see if the cancer had spread beyond the neck. It was a crucial step in determining the stage of the cancer and the appropriate course of treatment. Emily stayed by her side every day, though Clara could see the weariness in her daughter's eyes. Emily had been trying to keep up with her work while also dealing with her mother's sudden diagnosis. Clara felt guilty for being the cause of her daughter's exhaustion, but Emily refused to leave her side. The scans were exhausting. Clara had never been fond of hospitals, and being wheeled into a darkened room with machines that beeped and hummed all around her made her feel like a specimen, like something being studied rather than a person in pain. By the third day, Clara was beginning to feel the emotional and physical toll of everything. The pain from the swelling on her neck hadn't gone away, and every move seemed to pull at the sore muscles in her body. She lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the thoughts that seemed to cloud her mind at every turn. Emily entered the room carrying a tray of food. She set it down gently on the bedside table, giving her mother a soft smile. But Clara could tell that smile didn't reach her daughter's eyes. There was a quiet despair there, one that Clara knew all too well. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Emily asked, sitting down beside her, gently placing her hand on Clara's. Clara shrugged, her voice weak. "The same. Just tired, Emily. I'm so tired." Emily gave a tight nod, her own exhaustion evident in her posture. "I know, Mom. We'll get through this, okay? One step at a time." Clara nodded, though she wasn't so sure. The uncertainty of it all weighed heavily on her. Every test, every scan felt like another piece of the puzzle they were trying to put together. But Clara knew that puzzle wasn't going to be easy to solve. Later that afternoon, as Clara lay in bed staring out the window, she heard the familiar soft knock on the door before Dr. Harris entered, his expression more serious than usual. "Clara, Emily," Dr. Harris greeted them, his voice steady but with a trace of concern that Clara couldn't ignore. "I've just come from reviewing the results of your scans." Clara's heart raced, her palms sweaty. She tried to sit up straighter, but the soreness in her neck reminded her of the reality she was facing. Emily stood up immediately, moving closer to her mother's side. "Is it?" Emily began, but Dr. Harris cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "The scans show that the cancer has not spread beyond your neck," Dr. Harris said, his words offering a small but significant relief. "However, we did find some areas of concern. The tumor in your neck is larger than we initially anticipated, and it's pressing against some important structures in the area, including your carotid artery." Clara's eyes widened. The mention of the carotid artery sent a cold shiver down her spine. The carotid artery was a vital blood vessel, and the thought that the tumor was pressing against it made the situation even more serious. Dr. Harris continued, "This adds a layer of complexity to the treatment plan. We're going to need to act quickly to prevent any potential complications." "What kind of complications?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. Clara could feel her daughter's hand trembling in hers, but she didn't know what to say to calm her. She herself was too shaken to reassure anyone. "Bleeding, stroke. Complications like that are a risk when tumors press against major blood vessels," Dr. Harris explained. "But we are confident that with immediate intervention we can manage this. The next step will be to biopsy the tumor to get a definitive diagnosis and begin treatment." Clara could feel the weight of his words settling into her bones. The fight was far from over, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what lay ahead. The idea of surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation seemed so far away from the life she had known just a week ago. But there was no turning back now. "I'll be here, Mom," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "We'll do this together. You won't be alone." Clara squeezed her daughter's hand. She didn't have all the answers and she didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in days she felt a tiny bit of strength return. She wasn't ready to face this battle alone, not now, not ever. "Thank you, Emily," Clara whispered back, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Thank you for being here." Dr. Harris smiled softly. "We'll take it one day at a time. Let's start by getting that biopsy scheduled as soon as possible." As Dr. Harris left the room, Clara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering what little strength she had left. There was a long road ahead of her, but she had to take that first step. The next few days felt like an eternity for Clara. Each day was marked by the hum of machines, the shuffling of nurses, and the endless stream of tests and consultations. Emily remained by her side, though Clara could see the toll it was taking on her daughter as well. Their lives had shifted in ways neither of them had ever anticipated, and the uncertainty of what was to come loomed over them. The biopsy results, which Clara had been anxiously awaiting, were finally ready. Clara lay in bed, the sterile hospital room around her feeling colder than usual. She could hear the sounds of the busy ward outside, but inside her room, it felt as though the world had gone quiet. She had been dreading this moment, the moment when the doctors would confirm what she had feared the most. The lump in her neck was not just a benign growth, it was something far more dangerous. Dr. Harris entered, carrying a file, his expression grave. He didn't waste any time. The moment he stepped in, Clara's heart began to race. "Clara, Emily," Dr. Harris began, his voice low and steady, "I have the results from your biopsy." Clara could feel her body tense, her mind already preparing itself for the worst. Please let it be something treatable." Emily, sensing her mother's anxiety, gripped Clara's hand tightly. The quiet in the room seemed to stretch forever as Clara waited for Dr. Harris to continue. "Unfortunately," Dr. Harris said, his voice tinged with regret, "the biopsy confirmed that the tumor is cancerous as we suspected. It's a more aggressive form of squamous cell carcinoma, and it has spread to nearby tissues." Clara's mind went blank. Aggressive. Spread. The words echoed in her head, spinning around like a whirlwind. She had been hoping for good news, some shred of hope, but the reality was settling in far too quickly. Emily let out a sharp breath, but Clara couldn't focus on her daughter's reaction. Her mind was consumed by the diagnosis. Dr. Harris paused, allowing Clara to absorb the information, but there was more to be said. "There's more, Clara," he continued, his tone becoming even more serious. "We've also found something else. A secondary mass, near the lymph nodes, which makes things even more complicated. The cancer seems to have spread to a nearby lymph node, which means we'll need to adjust our treatment approach." Clara stared at him in shock. The lump on her neck had been bad enough, but now this? The cancer wasn't just confined to one area, it was spreading. Dr. Harris didn't sugarcoat anything. "This is why we need to act quickly. We can't afford to wait any longer. I know this is a lot to take in, but we have to start preparing for more intensive treatments. Chemotherapy will be our first line of defense, but depending on how your body responds, we may need to consider radiation or even surgery to remove the mass if possible." Clara's chest tightened, and she could feel the weight of his words sinking in. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. They all seemed like foreign concepts to her. She had never imagined she would be the one sitting in a hospital bed, discussing these terrifying options. The reality of her situation had become impossible to ignore. She looked up at Emily, who was sitting quietly at her side, her face a mask of concern and fear. Clara wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be okay, but the words caught in her throat. How could she promise that when she wasn't sure herself? Dr. Harris continued, his voice softening slightly. "I know this is overwhelming, Clara, but we have a team of specialists who will guide you through this. You're not alone in this fight. We will take this one step at a time, and we'll keep you as comfortable as possible while we work to treat this cancer." Emily spoke for the first time since the diagnosis. "How long do we have to wait to start treatment?" "We'll start the chemotherapy as soon as possible," Dr. Harris answered, his eyes meeting both Clara's and Emily's. "I'll schedule the first round for later this week. We'll also start radiation therapy to shrink the tumors before we look into surgery options. The treatments will be intense, but there's a very real possibility that we can beat this." Clara closed her eyes, trying to focus on the words. There was a part of her that felt like the fight had just begun, but there was another part that was terrified of what was to come. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. They sounded like a series of impossible hurdles that she wasn't sure she could clear. But she had no choice. She had to try. Dr. Harris stood up, preparing to leave, but before he did, he looked back at Clara and Emily, offering a small, reassuring smile. "We'll fight this together. And you're stronger than you think, Clara." As Dr. Harris left the room, Clara felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. One step at a time. The days following the diagnosis were a whirlwind of appointments, paperwork, and an endless stream of doctors and specialists. Clara felt as though she were trapped in an endless loop of consultations, each one more daunting than the last. The hospital had become a second home, and the sterile, lifeless walls seemed to be closing in around her with every passing day. Emily had become her rock, offering constant reassurance and support. She helped Clara with everything, from navigating the overwhelming information about the treatments to making sure she ate, even when Clara had little appetite. There were moments, though, when Clara felt a deep well of exhaustion, both physical and emotional. She had never imagined she'd find herself here, facing something so life-altering, and she struggled to accept the changes that were now part of her reality. Finally, the treatment plan was in place. Clara's team of doctors had worked together to create a strategy that would address her cancer aggressively but thoughtfully. Dr. Harris, the oncologist, had outlined the path forward, but Clara was left with a lingering sense of doubt. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the grueling road ahead, but she knew she had no choice. Today, Dr. Harris had arranged for Clara and Emily to meet with a radiation specialist, Dr. Jessica Porter, who would explain the role of radiation therapy in Clara's treatment. As they entered the consultation room, Clara could already feel the tension in her body. Would this treatment work? Would she survive it? Dr. Porter greeted them warmly, her tone comforting but professional. She was a woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. She began by reviewing Clara's scans and the current state of the cancer. "Clara, the first step is to begin radiation therapy," Dr. Porter began, her voice soothing yet firm. "The goal of radiation is to shrink the tumor before we proceed with chemotherapy. It will target the cancer cells in your neck, focusing on the area surrounding the carotid artery where the tumor is pressing against major blood vessels." Clara nodded, absorbing the information as best she could. Radiation had always seemed like a distant concept, something she had only heard about in passing. But now it was something she would have to face head-on. "Radiation will be done in cycles," Dr. Porter continued. "We'll start with a few sessions each week for a few weeks, then reassess your progress. The treatments themselves will last about 15 minutes each, and we'll focus on making sure you're as comfortable as possible throughout the process. However, I must be honest with you, radiation can have some side effects." Clara's chest tightened. She had expected this. There were always side effects, but hearing them aloud made it all too real. "You may experience some fatigue, skin irritation around the treated area, and possibly some difficulty swallowing or sore throat, depending on the dose we administer. But these side effects are temporary, and most patients recover quickly after treatment is completed." Emily looked at Clara, her eyes wide with concern. Clara's hand tightened around her daughter's. "Is there a risk of permanent damage?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Porter nodded sympathetically. "There is always some risk, Clara. But we take great care to minimize it. The benefits of radiation far outweigh the risks when it comes to treating cancer like yours. And with chemotherapy following radiation, we have a very strong chance of success." Clara's heart raced. It was a lot to digest. She didn't want to think about the possibility of permanent damage, but the reality of it was there, looming in the distance. "We will support you through this every step of the way," Dr. Porter added, sensing Clara's growing unease. "You won't be alone in this. After radiation, we will begin chemotherapy to target any remaining cancer cells. It's an aggressive treatment, but with the radiation therapy, we hope to reduce the tumor size significantly, which will help chemotherapy be more effective." The words chemotherapy and aggressive hit Clara like a physical blow. She couldn't imagine what that would feel like. The sickness, the fatigue, the overwhelming weight of fighting something so fierce. But she had no choice. "Is it possible to stop the cancer completely?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. Dr. Porter gave a hopeful smile. "Yes. We have a good prognosis with this treatment plan. While we can't guarantee a complete cure, the likelihood of success with radiation followed by chemotherapy is very high. We'll be monitoring you closely throughout the process, and we will adjust the treatment as needed to make sure we're targeting the cancer effectively." Clara sat back, trying to absorb it all. The next few weeks would be filled with treatments that would make her body weaker and her mind heavier. But there was a glimmer of hope. The cancer was treatable. There were options. As Dr. Porter finished outlining the specifics of the radiation schedule, she added one final note of encouragement. "Clara, you are a strong woman. I know this is a difficult journey, but you're not in this alone. We have a team ready to fight with you." After the consultation, Clara and Emily walked out of the room together. Clara's mind was spinning, but there was a part of her that felt lighter. For the first time in days, she could see a way forward. A way to fight back. The road would be long, but it was a road she was willing to travel. The days following the consultation were filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Clara had never been one to dwell on emotions, preferring to keep her thoughts to herself and focus on what needed to be done. But cancer had a way of breaking through even the strongest walls, leaving her vulnerable and uncertain about everything she once took for granted. Each time she lay in her hospital bed, waiting for her treatments, her mind would race. The radiation was scheduled to start in just a few days, and then came the chemotherapy. The thought of it alone made her stomach churn. The idea of being sick, of losing her hair, of feeling so weak, it all seemed too much to bear. But Clara couldn't afford to give in to the fear. She had to fight. She had to survive. Emily had been a constant source of support, but Clara could see the strain in her daughter's eyes. Emily was trying to be strong for her, but Clara could feel the weight of her own fear reflected in her daughter's every word and gesture. Emily had always been the rock of the family, the one who held everything together. Clara had never allowed herself to rely on anyone else, but now she had no choice. Emily was her lifeline, her tether to the world she was fighting to stay in. One evening, after another long day of testing, Clara found herself alone in her room, staring out of the window at the setting sun. The golden light painted the walls with a soft, comforting glow, but Clara felt a deep sense of isolation creeping in. Her life had been so full before, her teaching, her community work, her home. Now everything seemed so distant, so far out of reach. What would her future look like? Would she ever have the strength to go back to her old life? Or was this the beginning of a new, darker chapter? Emily had gone to the cafeteria to grab something to eat, leaving Clara with her thoughts. The silence in the room was deafening, and for a moment, Clara allowed herself to drift into the depths of fear she had been avoiding. What if she didn't make it? The thought crossed her mind before she could stop it. What if this battle was too much for her to win? Her mind went to her mother, who had passed away from cancer many years ago. Clara had watched her suffer, watched as she lost her strength, her vitality, her very essence. Clara had promised herself that she wouldn't end up like that. She wouldn't let cancer strip her of everything that made her who she was. But now, as she lay in that sterile hospital bed, the weight of the world on her shoulders, Clara couldn't escape the gnawing doubt. She had never been so afraid in her entire life. She had been strong for so long, but now the fight felt like something she might not be able to win. Just then, the door to her room creaked open, and Emily stepped in, holding a plastic tray with a cup of soup. Her eyes were bright, but Clara could see the fatigue written all over her face. "I got you some dinner," Emily said softly, setting the tray on Clara's lap. She sat down beside her, her hand resting on Clara's. The warmth of her daughter's touch felt like a lifeline. Clara forced a smile. "You're too good to me." Emily smiled back, but it was small and weary. "You've done everything for me, Mom. You've always been there. Now it's my turn to be here for you." Clara's heart tightened at her daughter's words. The emotional toll of this journey was becoming too much to bear. She had always been the one to care for others, to offer support and love. But now she needed Emily's strength more than ever. It was a humbling realization, and one Clara wasn't sure she was ready to face. "I don't know if I can do this, Emily," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can go through with the treatments, the pain, the sickness. I don't know if I can survive it." Emily's grip on her hand tightened. "Mom, you've been through so much already. You're strong and I know you can fight this. We're in this together. You're not alone." Clara looked into her daughter's eyes, searching for the strength she needed to find within herself. Could she really do this? Could she face the treatments, the unknowns, the fears that loomed ahead? Could she survive this? For Emily, for herself, for the life she still wanted to live? As the days passed, Clara began to realize that her strength wasn't just about fighting cancer. It was about facing the fear of the unknown, about allowing herself to lean on the people who loved her. She didn't have to fight this battle alone. Emily was there. Her doctors were there. And as terrifying as it was, she would face it, step by step. With each treatment, Clara would become weaker. But with each passing day, she would also become stronger, not just in body but in spirit. She wouldn't let this cancer define her. She would fight it. For herself and for Emily. Clara had braced herself for the worst. The first round of chemotherapy had been grueling, just as Dr. Harris had warned. She had spent the first few days afterward feeling like a shell of the woman she once was, exhausted, nauseous, and emotionally drained. Her once strong body had been ravaged by the drugs, and her mind, too, was caught in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. But something unexpected had happened. As the days passed, Clara found a small flicker of hope emerging from the darkness. She was still here. The tumor hadn't taken her down yet. With Emily by her side, Clara fought through the worst of the side effects. Each morning, she woke up with a sense of dread. Would today be another battle? Or would she find a way through it? The physical toll of chemotherapy was undeniable. Her hair had begun to thin, and her skin looked pale and tired. But beneath all of that, there was something stronger, her will to survive. One afternoon, just days after her second round of chemotherapy, Clara was sitting in the chair by the window, staring out at the world that felt so far beyond her reach. The bright sunlight shining through the glass felt almost foreign to her now, like a memory she couldn't quite grasp. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going like this, how many more treatments, how many more days of pain and exhaustion she would endure. But then there was a knock at the door and Emily walked in, her face lighting up when she saw Clara sitting up in the chair. "Mom," Emily said, her voice filled with relief, "you're sitting up. You look better today." Clara tried to smile, though the effort was difficult. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, Em." Emily moved closer, sitting next to her mother and taking her hand. "We're in this together. One day at a time, right?" Clara squeezed her daughter's hand, nodding. She had heard that phrase a million times before, but today it felt like it had more meaning than it ever had. One day at a time. Just then the door opened again, and Dr. Harris stepped in with a cheerful expression on his face, carrying Clara's latest test results. Clara braced herself, but his demeanor made her pause. "Could it be?" "Clara, Emily," Dr. Harris said with a smile, "I've got some good news." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Could the chemotherapy actually be working? "The scans we did after your second round of chemotherapy show a reduction in the tumor size," Dr. Harris continued. "It's not much yet, but it's progress. The radiation therapy we did in combination with the chemotherapy is showing signs of shrinking the tumor." Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. It was happening. There was hope. Emily's eyes welled with tears and she wrapped her arms around Clara, hugging her tightly. "I knew you could do it, Mom. I knew you were strong enough to fight this." Clara closed her eyes, a sense of relief washing over her. She wasn't out of the woods yet. The battle was far from over. But this was a victory, a small one but a victory nonetheless. The cancer hadn't won. Not yet. Dr. Harris smiled at them both, clearly pleased by the progress. "This is a positive step forward. We'll continue with the same treatment plan, but this is the sign we were hoping for. It means the cancer is responding to the treatment." Clara nodded slowly, still processing the news. It was only the beginning, but it was something. She wasn't ready to celebrate yet, there was still so much work to be done. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of hope that had been absent from her life for so long. "I'm not out of the woods, am I?" Clara asked softly, looking at Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris shook his head. "No, Clara, you're not out of the woods yet. But this is a good sign. The cancer is being fought. You're making progress." Clara's mind was still spinning, but a small, cautious smile tugged at her lips. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to give up. She had taken the first step toward recovery, and now, one day at a time, she would continue to fight.